Chosen One, this be the biggest meltdown for you. You're worthy. The sky above the ruined city of Ashkaron was the color of bruised steel. Thunder didn't rumble, it screamed. Kael had been running for 17 days. Not from monsters, not from bounty hunters, not even from the Black Covenant that had burned his village to glass. He was running from himself. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same scene replaying like a cursed memory loop. Him standing in the center of the great Obsidian circle, thousands of glowing threads of fate hanging in the air like golden spider silk, all of them pointing at him. Every single strand, every color, every timeline. And the voice, ancient, genderless, tired beyond time, whispering directly into the marrow of his bones. You, only you. There is no mistake. There never was. He hated that voice more than death, because if it was true, then every scream he'd ever heard, every friend he'd buried, every lover who'd bled out in his arms, was because the universe had decided he was the only one who could carry the weight. And he was failing, spectacularly. He collapsed against the blackened wall of what used to be the Starfall Library. Rain that smelled of iron and ozone hammered his shoulders. His cloak was more holes than fabric. The blade across his back, the one they called Dawn Reaver, the blade that was supposed to cleave gods, felt heavier than the shame in his chest. "I can't," he rasped to no one. "I can't do this anymore." The wind answered first, then the ground, then reality itself. A crack like the sky being torn open with bare hands. Light, violent, wrong, exploded upward from beneath the cracked cobblestones. The air turned thick, syrupy. Time stuttered. And there she was. Not a goddess, not an angel, not even the voice. Just a woman. Maybe 30, maybe 3,000. Hair like spilled midnight, eyes like dying stars, wearing armor made of broken crowns. She looked at Kael the way a mother looks at a child who just burned the house down trying to make breakfast. "You're having a tantrum," she said. Kael laughed. It sounded like choking. "A tantrum? My entire bloodline is dead. Half the continent is ash. The thing that's supposed to save everything is inside me, and it's rotting. I can feel it. Every day it burns hotter, and I get weaker. This," he gestured at himself, filthy, bleeding, and shaking. "This is not a tantrum. This is the universe making a mistake, and I'm the proof." She crouched in front of him. Rain slid off her like she was made of oil and sorrow. "Let me tell you something the prophecies never say. The chosen one isn't chosen because they're perfect or strong or pure or even particularly good." She reached out and pressed 2 fingers against the center of his chest, right over the scar where the shard of ending had fused with his heart 2 years ago. The chosen one is chosen because they're the only one stubborn enough and broken enough to keep screaming no when everything else says yes, this is how it ends. Kael tried to pull away. Couldn't. Her voice dropped lower, almost kind. "You think this meltdown is weakness. This is the moment the prophecy was waiting for. Not the shining hero on the white hill, not the perfect vessel, not the sinless saint. The prophecy was always waiting for the day the chosen one finally breaks and then chooses to stand up anyway. That's the part no bard sings about. That's the part no temple teaches. That's the part that actually changes fate." She leaned closer. Her breath smelled like old lightning and new grief. "You're not falling apart, Kael of Ashkaron. You're finally malleable. And malleable things can be reforged." Thunder cracked again, closer, angrier. She stood. The violet light behind her began to fold in on itself, forming wings made of torn prophecies and half-dead stars. "I'll give you the only gift I'm allowed to give," she said. And then she spoke the worst, most beautiful sentence Kael had ever heard. You don't have to be worthy to be the chosen one. You just have to be willing to let the world burn you until something new walks out of the ashes. She touched his forehead. Everything went white. When Kael opened his eyes again, the rain had stopped. The woman was gone. But the fire inside his chest, the one that had been eating him alive, wasn't gone. It was different, hotter, cleaner, sharpened. He looked down at his shaking hands. They were still shaking, but now they were fists. He laughed, hoarse, ugly, alive. "Fine," he whispered to the empty city, to the dead gods, to the cruel stars, to the prophecy itself. "You want a meltdown? I'll give you the biggest fucking meltdown this world has ever seen." He stood, slowly, painfully, like a blade being pulled from its own wound. "Then I'll walk out the other side and finish what you started." The wind carried his words across the broken city like a declaration of war. And somewhere in the space between seconds, the voice that had haunted him for 2 years finally went quiet. Not because it left, but because it was smiling. Kael took one step, then another, and the ground beneath him, just slightly, began to sing. The biggest meltdown wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and he was finally worthy enough to burn the whole damn story down and write a new one in the ashes. The sky above the ruined city of Ashkaron hung like a shroud of bruised steel, heavy with the promise of unending storm. Thunder didn't merely rumble, it screamed across the heavens, a primal wail that echoed the fractures in the world below. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone, mingled with the acrid smoke of fires long extinguished but never forgotten. Rain fell in relentless sheets, each drop a needle of ice that pierced through the tattered remnants of Kael's cloak, soaking him to his very soul. Kael had been running for 17 days straight, not from the grotesque shadows of the void spawn that prowled the wastelands, nor from the relentless bounty hunters of the Iron Guild who tracked him with enchanted hounds and scrying crystals. Not even from the fanatical zealots of the Black Covenant who had razed his childhood village to molten glass in their quest to snuff out the prophecy before it could ignite. No, Kael was fleeing from something far more insidious, himself. His boots caked with mud and the dried blood of forgotten skirmishes pounded against the cracked cobblestones of what was once a thriving metropolis. Ashkaron had been the jewel of the Eastern realms, a bastion of arcane knowledge and architectural wonders, where spires of crystal pierced the clouds and libraries housed tomes that whispered secrets of the cosmos. Now it was a graveyard of shattered dreams, its towers toppled like felled giants, its streets haunted by the ghosts of the slain. Kael's breath came in ragged gasps, his lungs burning as if filled with embers. He clutched at his side, where a fresh wound from a Covenant assassin's blade wept crimson tears. Every time he dared to close his eyes, even for a moment's respite, the vision assaulted him, a relentless, cursed loop etched into his mind like a brand on flesh. He saw himself standing in the heart of the great Obsidian Circle, that ancient ritual site hidden deep within the Whispering Mountains. The air there had shimmered with ethereal energy, and thousands of glowing threads of fate had materialized around him, hanging like strands of golden spider silk woven by the gods themselves. Each thread represented a possibility, a timeline, a life unlived or a doom averted, and every single one, every hue from fiery crimson to serene azure, every twist and knot pointed unerringly at him. Then came the voice. It wasn't a sound carried on the wind, it resonated directly into the marrow of his bones, ancient and genderless, carrying the weight of eons. It sounded tired, as if the universe itself had grown weary of its own machinations. "You
Only you. There is no mistake. There never was. Kael hated that voice more than he hated death itself, because if it was true, if he truly was the chosen one foretold in the Elder Scrolls, then every horror he had endured was not random cruelty, but deliberate design. The screams of his family as the Covenant's flames consumed them, the lifeless eyes of friends buried in shallow graves along the refugee trails, the final gasping breath of his lover Ilara as she bled out in his arms after a void spawn ambush. All of it was because the cosmos had deemed him the sole bearer of its burdens, and he was failing, spectacularly, irrevocably failing. His legs gave out at last, and he collapsed against the blackened wall of what had once been the Starfall Library. The structure loomed like a skeletal sentinel, its grand arches now choked with vines and debris, its once vast halls reduced to echo chambers of wind and regret. Rain hammered his shoulders mercilessly, turning the ground into a slurry of ash and mud. His cloak, woven from the hides of mountain drakes in better days, was now more holes than fabric, offering no shield against the elements. Strapped across his back was Dawnreaver, the legendary sword forged in the heart of a dying star, said to cleave through gods and unravel destinies. But to Kael, it felt heavier than the shame coiling in his chest, a constant reminder of the power he couldn't wield. "I can't," he rasped to the empty void, his voice barely audible over the storm's fury. "I can't do this anymore. Take it back. Take it all back." The wind howled in response, whipping debris into whirlwinds that danced mockingly around him. Then the ground trembled, a low vibration that built into a quake. Reality itself seemed to stutter, the air thickening like syrup, time folding in on itself in unnatural ways. A crack rent the sky, louder than any thunder, as if the heavens were being torn open with bare, bloodied hands. Light erupted from beneath the cracked cobblestones, violent, violet, and utterly wrong. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, distorting the rain into prismatic shards that hung suspended in the air. And there she was.
She wasn't a goddess, though her presence carried the aura of divine indifference. Not an angel, for there was no halo of light or promise of salvation. Not even the embodiment of the voice that had tormented him. She was simply a woman. Or at least she appeared as one. Perhaps 30 years old in mortal reckoning, or 3,000 in the timeless flow of the ethereal realms. Her hair cascaded like spilled midnight, absorbing the storm's light rather than reflecting it. Her eyes were like dying stars, flickering with the last gasps of cosmic fire, holding depths that could swallow souls. She wore armor forged from broken crowns, each jagged piece etched with the sigils of fallen empires, clinking softly as she moved. She regarded Kael with a gaze that pierced through his defenses, the way a mother might look at a child who had just burned down the family home in a misguided attempt to cook breakfast. There was no pity there, only a weary understanding born of witnessing countless such breakdowns across the ages. "You're having a tantrum," she said, her voice cutting through the storm like a blade through silk. It was calm, almost conversational, laced with an undercurrent of amusement that bordered on cruelty. Kael laughed, but it emerged as a choking sob, raw and broken. He wiped rain and tears from his face with a trembling hand, smearing mud across his scarred features. "A tantrum? Is that what you call this? My entire bloodline wiped out in a single night of fire and screams. Half the continent reduced to ash and bone by wars I never asked to fight. And this thing inside me." He pressed a hand to his chest, where the shard of ending had fused with his heart 2 agonizing years ago. "It's rotting me from the inside. Every day it burns hotter, and I grow weaker. Look at me." He gestured wildly at his filthy, bleeding, shaking form. This isn't a tantrum. This is the universe admitting its mistake. I'm the proof, the living, breathing evidence that the prophecy is a lie." She crouched before him, her movements fluid and unhurried, as if the storm were merely a gentle breeze. Rain slid off her armor like water on oil, leaving her untouched by the world's chaos. Up close, Kael could see the faint glow of runes beneath her skin, pulsing in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. "Let me tell you something the prophecies never mention," she murmured, her voice shifting to something almost intimate, like sharing a forbidden secret. "The chosen one isn't selected because they're perfect or unbreakable or pure of heart, not because they're the strongest warrior or the wisest sage, not even because they're particularly good or destined for glory in the songs of bards." She reached out, her fingers cool as starlight, and pressed them firmly at the center of his chest, right over the jagged scar where the shard had embedded itself during the ritual of binding. The contact sent a jolt through him, a mix of pain and clarity that made his vision swim. Beneath his ribs, the shard stirred, its chaotic energy flaring in response. "They're chosen," she continued, her eyes locking onto his with unyielding intensity, "because they're the only ones stubborn enough and broken enough to keep screaming no when the rest of existence whispers, 'Yes, this is how it ends.' You're not the hero of shining armor on the white hill, Kael. You're not the flawless vessel or the sinless saint. The prophecy was never about that. It was always waiting for this exact moment, the day the chosen one finally shatters under the weight." Kael tried to pull away, but her touch held him fast, anchoring him in place as the storm raged on. Her voice dropped lower, threaded with a kindness that felt earned through suffering, not bestowed lightly. "You think this meltdown is your weakness? That it's the end of your path? No, this is the crucible the stars have been forging for you, the part no bard dares to sing, no temple dares to teach, the hidden verse that actually twists fate. When the chosen one breaks, and in that breaking finds the will to rise, not as they were, but as something forged anew." She leaned closer, her breath carrying the scent of old lightning and fresh grief, a paradox that mirrored the storm around them. "You're not falling apart, Kael of Ashkaron. You're becoming malleable. And malleable things, they can be reforged into weapons that cut through the impossible." Thunder cracked overhead, closer now, angrier, as if the heavens themselves protested her words. She rose to her full height, the violet light behind her coiling and expanding, forming ephemeral wings woven from torn prophecies and the remnants of half-dead stars. They shimmered with latent power, casting eerie shadows across the ruins. "I'll give you the only gift I'm permitted to bestow," she said, her voice echoing with finality. And then she uttered the sentence that would haunt and heal him in equal measure, the worst, most beautiful words he had ever heard. "You don't have to be worthy to be the chosen one. You just have to be willing to let the world burn you until something new emerges from the ashes." With that, she touched his forehead, her fingers like brands of frozen fire. Everything exploded into white, a blinding cascade of light that drowned out the storm, the ruins, the pain. When Kael's vision cleared, the rain had ceased. The woman was gone, vanished as abruptly as she had appeared, leaving only a faint scent of ozone in her wake. The violet light had faded, the ground no longer trembling. But inside his chest, the shard, the fire that had been devouring him, wasn't extinguished. It was transformed. Hotter, yes, but cleaner now, like a forge flame tempered for purpose rather than destruction. Sharpened, honed to an edge that cut through doubt instead of flesh. He looked down at his hands, still trembling, veins pulsing with newfound energy. They clenched into fists, not out of despair, but resolve. He laughed again, this time hoarse, ugly, but undeniably alive. It bubbled up from deep within, echoing off the ruined walls like a challenge to the cosmos. "Fine," he whispered to the empty city, to the dead gods watching from their shattered thrones, to the cruel stars that had scripted his torment, to the prophecy that had bound him. "You want a meltdown? I'll give you the biggest fucking meltdown this world has ever witnessed." He stood, slowly at first, every muscle protesting the effort, painfully, like a blade being drawn from its own wound, inch by agonizing inch. But he stood. As his feet found purchase on the slick stones, the ground beneath him hummed, a subtle vibration, like the first notes of a long-forgotten song. The wind carried his words across the broken city, transforming them into the declaration of war that rustled the debris and stirred the shadows. Somewhere in the interstitial spaces between seconds, the voice that had haunted him for 2 years finally fell silent. Not because it had abandoned him, but because it was smiling, satisfied at last. Kael took one step forward, then another, each gaining strength. The ruins of Ashkaron seemed to shift around him, as if the city itself sensed the change. Vines receded slightly from doorways, faint lights flickered in long dark crystals embedded in the walls. Dawn Reaver, once a burden, now thrummed with anticipation on his back, its hilt warm to the touch. But this was no fairy tale redemption. The path ahead was still shrouded in darkness. The Black Covenant would not relent, their armies massed on the horizons, their dark rituals summoning horrors from the void. Allies were scarce, scattered survivors who viewed him with suspicion, whispering of the cursed one who brought doom wherever he tread. And within, the Shard whispered temptations of power, urging him to embrace the meltdown fully, to let the fire consume not just him, but everything. Yet in that moment of breaking and remaking, Kael understood. The biggest meltdown wasn't the end of his story. It was the forge that would temper him into the weapon the world needed. Not a perfect hero, but a worthy one. Worthy because he had stared into the abyss of his inadequacy and chosen to step forward anyway. He crested a hill overlooking the city's edge where the wastelands stretched into infinity under a clearing sky. Stars began to peek through the dissipating clouds as if acknowledging his resolve. "I'll burn it all down," he vowed, his voice steady now. "The lies, the chains, the false prophecies, and from the ashes, I'll write a new story, one where the chosen isn't a puppet, but the author." The wind rose in agreement, carrying whispers of ancient power, and Kael, the once broken wanderer, walked into the night, not as a victim of fate, but as its reckoning. For in the heart of the meltdown, he had discovered his worth, and the world would tremble at what came next.